Hi, I'm Carol Anne Riddell, and welcome to Book It. We have got a lot in store for you today, so let's get right to it. We begin with writer and consultant Maeve DuVally and her remarkably candid memoir, Maeve Rising, coming out trans in corporate America. Maeve, thank you so much for being here today.
Carol Anne, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
Your memoir is so incredibly honest, and I have to say that I really appreciated that about it. You start the book in 2018. At that time in your life, you were still Michael. You're sitting in your office at Goldman Sachs, and you say you had a revelation of sorts. Can you take us back to that time period?
Yes, I'm on the board of a journalism fellowship, and they have a fundraising gala every October. And I was all prepared to go to that gala that evening, and something compelled me to get out of my chair and walk about a third of a mile to the closest Sephora and buy some makeup and wear makeup to the event. And I really did not understand what it was that day, but that kind of was the start of everything that's culminated in the me that's here today.
Yeah, and for a period of time you were Maeve in your personal life, but Michael at work, because you weren't ready to come out in that corporate setting at Goldman Sachs yet. What changed for you?
From that evening on, I quickly realized that I had wanted to be a woman all my life. And I began to become that woman almost immediately in my social life. The way I thought, the way I dressed, the people I hung out with. But for whatever reason, I wasn't comfortable coming out yet at Goldman Sachs. And the reason people don't come out sooner is they're worried about whether they'll be accepted or not.
Sure.
And so in April of 2019, I still wasn't out at Goldman Sachs, but Goldman Sachs held a panel with three very confident transgender women on the panel talking about how they navigated the workplace. And once I saw how happy and confident those people were, I decided on the spot that I was going to come out at work.
Wow. And Maeve, you are really unflinchingly honest in the book about your earlier struggles with alcoholism. I know that you're sober now.
Yep.
Congratulations on that. But I think it's important to talk about that because, as you say, you make it very clear in the book, it's incredibly entwined with your story.
Yes, and well, first of all, in terms of being honest, if you're going to write a memoir, what's the point of writing a memoir if you're not going to be really honest, right?
Agreed.
When I started telling my transgender story publicly, and I wasn't talking about being sober, I just found, to me, it wasn't honest. My story to me doesn't make sense unless I talk about my sobriety. And I got sober in January of 2018, so I'm coming up on 6 years. And I had a horrific drinking experience, and it got really bad towards the end. And I believe that if I hadn't gotten sober, number one, I might be dead. Number two, if I wasn't dead, I wouldn't be the person you see before you today, because I think I used alcohol to bury this part of myself, and that's not an uncommon thing for transgender people and LGBTQ+ people more broadly, to use drugs and alcohol to kind of cope with their feelings and really not be their true selves.
Sure.
And I believe that as long as you're excessively using alcohol and drugs, you really can't know your true self.
Some of the stories that you talk about in the book relating to the drinking, I mean, they're very painful. One that really stayed with me was you described, you were married at the time, 2 boys living in the suburbs, and one of your sons was very ill. He was in the hospital, and you were meant to go drive into the city to pick him and your wife up from the hospital when he was discharged. Can you tell us about what happened?
Yeah, my son had cancer at the time. He's okay now.
So glad to hear that.
Yeah, and he had a lot of complications. He actually was in coma for about 3 weeks, and he was just coming home after being in that induced coma because he had a really bad infection. And I was supposed to go pick him up, and I just had a really bad hangover. I drank a lot the night before, and I had purchased his pain medication for when he came home, and it happened to be liquid morphine. So I had a really bad hangover, and I said, you know, like, I think if I drink that, maybe it'll take the edge off my hangover, and the drive to the city won't be so bad. And well, it was bad. I got in 2 accidents not more than a half mile from my home, and I woke up, totaled my car and woke up handcuffed to a hospital bed. And I never called my wife to tell her that I wasn't coming to pick her up. You know, I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to make amends and make that up to my wife, because some of the things I did were truly horrible. But, you know, that's what alcoholics and addicts do.
Yeah, and again, getting to the point of your complete honesty. I was so struck by that. And it wasn't as if you didn't try to stop drinking, because you did try repeatedly. What was the turning point?
You have to really want recovery, and you have to embed recovery in your life every single day. You have to go to recovery meetings. You have to congregate with other sober people just to kind of break the isolation.
Yeah.
And if you don't do all those things, then it's very difficult to stay sober. And I wasn't willing to do all those things, and I am now.
You've been married twice. You have 3 children. How has your family reacted to all that has changed in your life?
I'm very fortunate because a lot of transgender people, their families don't accept them, and there's a lot of young transgender people that are out on the street or homeless because they've been thrown out of their homes.
That's
and
right.
I find that really, really sad. My family, some of them took a little bit longer than others, but my 3 children, my 2 ex-wives, my extended family, they've all accepted me. Some of the forms of acceptance are different. I'd say with my extended family, some of them don't really understand what it means to be transgender in a way that somebody who lives in New York and is around transgender people might understand it. But they see that I'm very happy right now, and because I'm happy, they knew I was unhappy for most of my life, so they're happy for me.
And that's what we want for anyone that we care about, right? Is to be happy, I think.
Exactly.
You make it very clear in the book that you had an unhappy childhood, and also that you disliked or were really uncomfortable with your male traits, but you didn't connect that to being transgender at the time, right?
No, I didn't. And it's easy to go back and look at your life and say, boy, I wish I had come out when I was 15. Well, when I was 15, it was the middle of the 1970s. I was living in rural Massachusetts. Would that really have been a good time for me to come out?
Right.
Would I have had a really good support network? The word transgender at that time wasn't in the lexicon. Right. I think they called people transsexuals or cross-dressers or whatever they called them back then. But I really didn't like anything about myself. In addition to that, I didn't like anything masculine about myself. So I thought it was just part of my general self-hatred, and I didn't think anything more of it.
It's very interesting, yeah. That makes sense to me. I'd like to go back to the decision to come out at Goldman. You were a managing director in corporate communications. You left work on a Friday before Memorial Day weekend as Michael. You returned on the Tuesday after the holiday as Maeve. What was the reaction? What was that like?
We decided to do that because if you think about it, I'd been at Goldman for a long time, and I'd worked with all the senior people at Goldman, all the senior people at the time, and the people who were actually going to take over after those people left. So I was very well known, and because we decided to do kind of a flip the switch type of transition at work, and
just in time for summer.
Just in time for summer, yeah. And I thought the timing was perfect. I had a great summer.
Yeah.
And you know, we drew up a plan. We talked about who we had to let know in advance that this was going to happen, and we let them know so there wouldn't be that many surprises. And we particularly talked to the people who worked most closely with me, the people who surrounded me at work, so that they were prepared. And you know, I just walked in to the office with a different name, with a different appearance, and I was just walking on air all day. It was one of the happiest days of my life.
That's wonderful to hear. And you said repeatedly that your experience at Goldman was positive, that you felt very supported. What advice would you give to other companies in terms of helping employees on this front?
Well, the biggest advice that I could give is to be ready. If you don't have any out transgender people yet, there's a lot of resources out there. You can talk to companies that have had experiences that your company has a relationship with, or you can reach out to, there's a lot of transgender consultants who do this for a living, and just be prepared. And that includes several different aspects. It's whether you have the right transgender healthcare benefits, because it's quite complex and expensive to physically transition. So making sure those benefits are in place are very important. But just making sure the Human Resources Department is ready to support the person when they're coming out. That's also important as well. So if you do that and you're ready, chances are things are going to go okay.
I've heard you say a couple of times that one of the biggest misconceptions about transgender people is that the change is primarily external. That's one of the biggest misconceptions, and I found that so interesting. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
There's a lot of focus on the external. Obviously, if you look at me today, my feminine external appearance is very important to me. I put a lot of time into it, try to buy nice clothes, get a nice hairstyle, nice makeup. It's all important to me. And you know, I've had surgeries related to my transition. I'm probably going to have a couple more, and so if you think about that, maybe the tendency is to kind of focus on, well, this is just an external thing. The external is important, but the internal is far more important. And what I mean by that is I'm a transgender person who identifies as a woman. So one of the most rewarding things that can happen to me is to be part of a group of women and to be accepted as one of them. And that is such a warm, great experience for me. It by far eclipses anything external about the transition.
Maeve, I know you've now left Goldman. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
I've decided I just love writing, and I've always wanted to write, and that's why I became a journalist. I just finished a short story. I call it trans dystopian science fiction that I'm going to try and sell.
Wow.
I'm working on a novel. I think I'm going to pivot to fiction right now. So that's really
exciting.
That's really important. I get asked to speak publicly quite a bit, usually by corporations, to talk to their employees about my experience and how people at other corporations can learn from it. I've done some consulting for Goldman Sachs. I consult for another PR firm. So I do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I'd love to write weekly editorials somewhere. That would be really interesting. I'm 62, but I feel I've just been reborn, and the outlook is very promising for me.
Just a last question for you, Maeve. What do you hope people take away from your story?
Let's go back to the word transition. This word transition is applied to transgender people, and we do go through a transition. That is an accurate way to describe what we go through. I believe transitions of consequence never have an end point, meaning I will be striving for the rest of my life to learn what it means to think like a woman. But that's okay. And on top of that, the important thing to realize is that every human being is in transition, right? Every human being is trying to find out what their ideal version of self is,
Sure.
and hopefully move to that idealized version of self over the course of their lives. So this whole idea of self-discovery and self-actualization, I think it's a universal human experience. And I think in this environment, the best thing to do is to emphasize what we have in common with everybody else, not talk about our differences.
Maeve, thank you so much for all this time. What a pleasure it's been talking to you. A lot to think about there.
Well, thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Here on Book It, we love hearing how accomplished professionals in the book world got their start, and we hope you do too. Here's how I did it.
Hi, I'm Ebony LaDelle. I'm the author of Love Radio, which was one of Apple's best books of 2022 and People's Magazine's best book of the summer for 2022. I write stories that center Black female voices, and before I was an author, I was a book marketer at places like Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, and HarperCollins. But today I'm going to tell you about my writing, so here's how I did it. I always felt like I found a career I loved, which was marketing, but I also realized it was a cop-out because I secretly wanted to write, but was just too fearful. I think when you have the luxury of working in an industry with such incredible talent, you start to question your own talent. And so it was really hard for me in the beginning to convince myself that writing was what I wanted to do until I lost one of my best friends. And I think through journaling my, hurts and my feelings for losing her, I really was able to find a love for writing again because it was the thing that saved me. And so I had to find a rhythm that worked for me. I found myself struggling to write in the evenings because I had invested so much of my energy into emails and calls and all the things that you get to do when you work in the publishing space. And so what I started to do was I started to write in the morning. And I think for me, my biggest fear was the fear of my work not being good enough. And so one of the things that I did was I tricked myself and I told myself that if the story was not good, I can always delete it. I can always put it in the trash. No one has to read it or see it. And so I think for anybody who's struggling with that, if their story would ever be great enough, that's really healthy advice because it makes the expectations really low and you might surprise yourself and work on a story that's incredible that resonates with a lot of readers. So my name is Ebony LaDelle. I am the author of Love Radio, and this is how I did it.
We are back with another edition of The Fine Print, and today we're talking about an issue all of us should pay attention to: literacy rates in our country. Joining us to discuss that is Primo Lasana, the Executive Director of Reading Partners New York. Primo, thanks so much for coming by today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I think we all know that literacy, the ability to read and write, is foundational. It is life-changing. So let's talk a little bit about what the numbers tell us in terms of how we're doing in this country and in this city.
Absolutely. So according to the National Assessment on Educational Progress, or the NAEP scores that are released every year, only 1 out of every 3 students is reading on grade level by the 4th grade across the United States.
I find that staggering.
Yeah, it's kind of an incredible statistic, which means, 2 out of 3 kids are behind where they need to be already by the 4th grade.
And what about locally?
Locally, the numbers are a little bit better. 2 years ago, we saw rates that told us that less than 40% of Black and Latino students in New York are reading on grade level by the 3rd grade. What we saw in comparison to that was that about 70% of their white peers are reading on grade level by the 3rd grade. So we see a huge divide racially between what students are able to achieve in New York City.
Prima, I remember from my days as an education reporter hearing about this concept of children moving from learning to read to reading to learn, and what a critical juncture that is. So what happens when they miss that step?
What we like to say is that literacy, or reading, is the foundation of all learning. It's the foundational building block that helps you become successful in every single classroom. You can't learn in a science classroom if you're behind grade reading level, or a math classroom or a history classroom. Everything requires reading. And so we want to make sure that all of our students are equipped with the ability to function at a high level in any classroom. And that means focusing on early literacy, starting with pre-K and going all the way through 4th grade.
And what happens when children do fall behind? How hard is it to catch up?
I refer to it sometimes almost as like an educational quicksand, right? Like it can be hard, right? You begin to struggle, and you begin to struggle from a confidence perspective and also from a skill perspective. So once you fall behind on confidence, you begin engaging less in the classroom. And we see students continue to decline as the content gets harder, but their skill level is not improving. And so we want to make sure that we have a solution to get kids caught up so that their confidence can increase, their joy that they have from reading can increase, and then we're going to see their skills take off as well.
It's interesting what you said, the joy piece, because books have been such a formative part of my life from as long as I can remember, and it's awful to think of children being deprived of that.
So much of what we try to do is make sure that students are happy when they're reading. And so making sure that they're also engaged, so that the subject matter that they're reading about is exciting to them, that it's relevant to them, that they see themselves and their families and their experiences represented in the texts as well. And I think that can evoke a lot of joy.
So tell us a little bit about Reading Partners. I'm very interested in the model because you're really harnessing the power of volunteerism on a broad scale.
That's right.
So tell us about the organization and what you guys are doing on this front.
Yeah, so Reading Partners has existed nationally for about 25 years now. And in New York, we've been here for about 12 years doing this work. Our model is that we work with students who are grades kindergarten through 4th grade, who are 6 months to 2.5 years behind grade reading level.
Wow.
And what we want to do is we want to build those foundational skill sets so that they can get back to grade reading level. We do this by working one-on-one with students in a high dosage tutoring model. So every student is connected with a volunteer who is trained, screened, and prepared to be an effective tutor by our staff. And then they work one-on-one with those students over the course of the school year, using our curriculum to get them back towards grade level.
And what about the pandemic? I mean, we know, we've all read that children lost so much academically during that time period. So what are you seeing now? Are you beginning to see a recovery at Reading Partners, or are we still really suffering?
Yeah, the pandemic was hard on students. It was hard on all of society, and I think sometimes we didn't talk about our youngest learners enough with regard to what they were going through and what they were experiencing.
I agree with that.
And so those NAEP scores, those national education scores that we just talked about, we unfortunately saw about 30 years of progress wiped out during the pandemic. So those scores had been incrementally increasing over the course of the last 30 years, and we took ourselves back to the 1980s, basically, in terms of where we are.
That is stunning.
It is. And so what we know, right, is that the pandemic also affected Black and brown students more than it did other students, because we saw those gaps in society exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Primo, you're clearly very passionate about this issue, and I know that you come to the role from CUNY yourself, is that right?
That's right. I'm a very proud alum of CUNY, of Hunter in particular, and so it was a great experience for me. And I'm really proud that we are an organization that also embraces CUNY. And so what we've done actually at Reading Partners New York City is we've set up a relationship with CUNY campuses across the city. Over the course of the history of the organization, we've had more than 300 CUNY volunteers, and it's a tremendous engine for engagement and volunteerism in the city. So we hope to see many more CUNY tutors coming through our doors.
Love to hear it. Just a last question for you, Primo. When students don't learn to read well, what are the implications for all of us as a society? Meaning, what happens if we fail to tackle this?
What we know is that the youth literacy crisis translates directly into an adult literacy crisis. So we also have a huge problem with adult literacy in the United States that we probably don't talk about enough. I think the other piece is that there are implications for our students who are also working towards driving out of poverty. So we know that poverty can be cyclical, and one of the best ways to interrupt that is with a great education, so that you can go get whatever job you want to get, so that you can bring more income into your family. And not being able to read at an early age is a tremendous indicator of your future success. I'll just say one more statistic, which I think is really important. The Annie E. Casey Foundation did a study on this, and what they found is that you are 4 times more likely to graduate from high school if you're reading on grade level by the 3rd grade.
Wow.
So we then know that literacy can be one of the most important levers that we can push as early as possible with our youngest students to ensure that they have success in the future. Because we want more high school graduates, we want more college graduates, we want folks who are empowered to go out there and be successful in the world. We're going to be a stronger country, we're going to be a stronger city if we have more young readers.
Absolutely. So much to think about there. Primo, thank you so much for all this time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Absolutely. Really appreciate it. Next up, author and columnist Linda Stasi is back, and as always, she's got plenty to say about what she's reading. Here's Uncensored.
You know what I hate about book reviews? They usually only talked about new books. Why is that? Bazillions of great books that were written years, decades, and centuries ago are still waiting to be read by bazillions of new readers. I've decided to buck that trend and talk about a book that isn't much talked about anymore, but has remained one of my favorite all-time reads. The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje remains for me one of the most beautifully written books of the last century. You may have seen the Academy Award-winning movie of the same name, but even so, please still read this book. The setting is an ancient villa in Italy at the end of World War II. 4 people are isolated in the villa. Kip is a Sikh in the British military who is a volunteer landmine diffuser. The slyly named Caravaggio is a maimed thief who was enlisted by the Allies for his illegitimate activities. Hannah is a 20-year-old Canadian nurse who takes care of the aforementioned English patient, a horribly burned man. Caravaggio believes the patient isn't English as they all think, but may have been a German spy. The novel revolves around the lives and losses of the 3 characters while taking us into the fevered dreams, memories actually, of the English patient. There is his torrid love affair with his colleague's wife, his desert explorations, and his ultimate attempt to cross the burning desert to save the woman he loves. As a writer, I've read the book several times, something I rarely do. I am endlessly amazed and awed by Ondaatje's ability to put this word next to that word next to this word in ways that always surprise. The book not just won the Booker Prize, but also won my heart over and over. Okay, I'm sorry for the cheese, but I can't help myself. Now, from the sublime to the practical, with another oldie that is always a newie. James Clear's Atomic Habits, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. Clear's 2018 book, which has sold tens of millions of copies, teaches us how little changes in your bad habits can bring lasting good changes in your life. When Clear was in high school and a star baseball player, a bat hit him in the head, causing injuries so severe that he nearly died. He had to be medevaced out of the local hospital to one that had facilities to treat his severe head injuries. Being incapacitated and working hard to get back to his first love, baseball, made Clear resolve to do this by making small changes every day. Big changes and big goals, he realized, were too immediately out of reach, so he decided to reach for smaller ones. Now a renowned and sought-after speaker, Clear has not only changed his life, but has literally changed millions of other lives. For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stasi.
That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for being here. We'd love to know what you think and what you're reading, so please check us out on social media. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. We'll see you next time on Book It.